Hey, you're listening to the wrong podcast. Topics today include the Beatles, scandals, and Stone Age cults.
Wrong! What's wrong with you? What's wrong with y'all?
What's wrong with you?
What's wrong with you people?
Wrong! You do have to tolerate it. It's my show.
Hi, I'm Tim. I'm here to talk about politics, culture, religion, sports, and anything else you're not allowed to talk about in polite company. Issue number 1! Bad vacation. I've got a story for you, and it's got to be the worst vacation I have ever heard of. First, let me tell you that the lovely Wendy and I, we've been watching Get Back on Disney+. It's a documentary about the Beatles' last album, and I should say we finished it. Actually, I should say we slogged through it. It was directed by Peter Jackson of Lord of the Rings fame and Hobbit fame and King Kong fame, and also Way Too Long movie fame. Peter, dude, I love your work. Seriously, I'm probably going to watch it because you make it. Except for that War Machines movie or whatever it was called. But, dude, you've got to learn to edit. Like, everything doesn't have to be 8.5 hours long. Oh my goodness, this thing was so long. And, like, I get it, you're a Beatles fan. Everything's important, but maybe not to everybody. Like, wow. I mean, cool. I'm glad I watched it, but I really wish I could have watched about half of it instead. So that just inspired me to, I should say it provoked my curiosity about some things to do with the Beatles. For example, the Beatles went on this big famous trip to India, and I wanted to know more about that. And this will lead into the worst vacation story I've ever heard of. In fact, let me set it up first. Why the Beatles went on vacation to India. So they were, they were into drugs. They kind of introduced hippie and drug culture to the Western world. Way to go, Beatles. That's a legacy that will live on, I'm sure. And at the same time, George Harrison is becoming interested in Eastern religions. And he has all of the Beatles go with him to this seminar in Wales to hear this guy, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, talk about transcendental meditation. And they're all set to go to this thing to hear this guy. And while they're there, their manager, Brian Epstein, dies of an accidental drug overdose. Again, way to go, Beatles. And I'm sure Brian Epstein was part of this whole drug thing himself. So not totally on the Beatles themselves, but he's into drugs like they are. He dies of an overdose while they're away to hear this Maharishi talk about meditation. So that ruins their plans. They're like, all right, we got to tend to affairs. We got to pay our respects. We got to, send our friend and manager off with a funeral. And so the Maharishi returns to India, and the Beatles, like 9 months later, they're like, let's go hear from him in person in his home. So they travel. There's a number of different musicians there already. Mia Farrow and a couple of her siblings are there learning from this guy. All the Beatles and all their wives and or girlfriends travel to India. They fly to Delhi, and then it's another 6-hour taxi ride from Delhi to this retreat center. And it's kind of rough. It's not really up to Western standards. The Maharishi orders some furniture for the Beatles specifically to kind of give them beds and give them a few other things that they're kind of used to in their rooms. And to the Beatles' credit, they're not complaining about the accommodations. They're like, yep, that's the deal. This is what we're going for. This is all good. And Ringo and Paul, they are there for about 2 weeks. And Ringo, he's got some food allergy issues. There's not much for him to eat. and his wife is deathly afraid of bugs. So he and she leave after about 10 days. And then Paul and his girlfriend, they leave after about 2 weeks. And George and John are planning to be there for like 2 months, 2 or 3 months. And while this is going on, John he's there with his wife, Cynthia. And Cynthia is really the focus of the story. She's the one who's got this awful vacation story. So while they're there, John has formed a friendship with this young Japanese artist named Yoko Ono, who is also married to someone else at the time. And every morning, John takes a walk to the local post office so he can secretly get a telegram. Is it telegraph or telegram? That, there's like somebody who's old enough to know the difference, but I doubt they know what a podcast is. Maybe somebody can clarify it to me. But he gets this telegram from Yoko Ono every morning, and he's taking walks to, get a telegram. And so he's there with his wife, and they are starting to annoy each other. Maybe he's just annoyed by her. Maybe she's picking up on the fact that he's, probably unfaithful. But they say that they can't meditate together in the same room. They need separate rooms. Eventually they start sleeping in separate rooms. So they're supposed to be there 2 to 3 months. After about 6 weeks, George Harrison and John Lennon, they are worried. They become suspicious that the Maharishi is actually a sexual predator. And they've got some indication, and they decide that they need to leave right away. And so they don't tell the Maharishi while they're leaving. In fact, Lennon is really passive aggressive about it. He's like, well, look, if you're so enlightened, you should know why we're leaving. You're the mystic, you figure it out. And they just wouldn't tell him why they're leaving. They just leave, which means that they've got to get their own transportation because they're literally just walking straight out. So they walk out, try to find a taxi that can take each of them all the way, 6-hour drive to Delhi. And, taxi drivers are in for the money. They're like, yes, but still, you got to find, this is, the mid 1960s, and it's kind of out there. They got to find a car that can actually make the trip. It takes them some time. They finally find a couple of taxis, start the drive back to Delhi. And on their way, the taxi holding Cynthia and John Lennon has a flat tire. And the driver pulls over and says, I'll be right back. I gotta go. He doesn't have a spare. He's got to go get a spare tire for their taxi. So they are in the middle of rural India, sitting on the side of a road in a taxi, and they wait for several hours, and this taxi driver never shows up. And they don't know what to do, so they decide to get out of the car and hitchhike back to Delhi. That's right, John Lennon, at basically the peak of his popularity, is hitchhiking through India to get to the airport in Delhi. So he and his wife hitchhike. They're able to make it all the way to Delhi. They get on the airplane, and while on the airplane, John gets drunk and goes on this tirade on his wife and tells her all of his sexual indiscretions that have ever taken place within their marriage. And that's a long flight. And good golly, Cynthia, I am sorry. That is just awful. And I should tell you that, this trip isn't totally awful for the Beatles. In fact, it's considered one of their most prolific songwriting times. And while they're there, George is like, hey, we are not here to develop our next album. But they were all feeling, the freedom to start writing songs. Maybe they were feeling inspired. Maybe it was because they were off drugs and feeling clean. I forgot to mention that part of the reason they wanted to get into transcendental meditation was to get off of drugs. They're like, we don't need drugs anymore. All we need is meditation. So, they're really having a prolific songwriting period while there. And the White Album, their double album, basically comes out of this trip to India. One of the songs, Sexy Sadie, is basically about the Maharishi. The song is about this woman who's the hot new thing, who turns out to be fake and steal everybody's money. And kudos Maharishi for getting a song written about you by John Lennon. But wow, Cynthia, I would like to hear your song about this trip. Issue number 2, cultic. Okay, there's this thing that you maybe have heard of, but probably not. It's a thing called a cargo cult. And this happened in numerous places. Westerners, missionaries or aid workers, they would discover these Stone Age tribes. These tribes out in the middle of jungles, who were basically still living with Stone Age technology. And these missionaries or other aid workers, they would have their own, they want to educate these people, bring them into the modern world, teach them to read. Missionaries, of course, want to teach them about their religion, their Christianity. They want to bring medical supplies to these people. And the way that the missionary supplies would arrive were through small airplanes. And these people were like, these airplanes are amazing. Like, they bring us all these amazing things, all this medical stuff, this great food, this technology, and they start worshiping the airplanes. And they're trying to figure out ways to entice the airplanes to come visit them more often. They're going to other places and building airstrips in hopes that the airstrip will tempt the airplane to land where they are and give them stuff. They build fake airplanes out of wood, with the materials they have, kind of like idols of airplanes. And they start worshiping these airplanes. And this activity has taken on the name of a logical fallacy. It's called a cargo cult fallacy. And it's the idea that if you just mimic if there's somebody you respect, somebody you want to emulate, or some company that you want to get everything they have, if you just mimic the things, like exterior things about them, you'll get the same results as that company or that person. So, for example, like let's say you hear about Warren Buffett's morning routine or what kind of authors Warren Buffett reads. So you're like, well, if I just start reading the same books as Warren Buffett, then I'll be as rich as Warren Buffett. Or you hear about Mark Wahlberg's crazy workout routine in the mornings, and you're like, all right, well, I'm going to wake up at 3 a.m. and I'm going to do this workout routine, and I'm going to say my prayers just the same way as he does, and that will make me a successful actor, just like Mark Wahlberg. And there's lots of examples of this that we think we're so much smarter than these primitive Stone Age tribes who think they can mimic the airplanes and get stuff. But we do these kind of things all the time too. That we think if we just do the same kind of general stuff, we don't realize that no, there's like a deep intelligence in Warren Buffett that goes far beyond what kind of books he's reading. I can't just use the same kind of guitar as Bruce Springsteen, and that will make me a great musician. There's something so much more deeper than those external things. Remember, I want to know what's wrong with you.
What's wrong with you?
If you'd like to submit a question, topic, or tell me how I was wrong, you can email me at listen@therewrongpodcast.com or submit a comment on my website, therewrongpodcast.com. And help me spread the wrong message. If you like what you hear, share it with your friends. Now it's time for my favorite part of the show. I was wrong.
I was wrong. I was wrong.
So my last episode was on art and beauty and on the objective reality of beauty. And it provoked lots of comments, lots of great discussion. I really appreciate everybody who listened and wanted to engage with me about it. Stephanie wrote in and she said, how does your explanation of art coexist with your assertion that both good and bad art exists? And this is certainly a problem, a confusion I recognize, that there are two definitions of art. One is that all things are art. Everything anybody does can be considered art. And the other, I was explaining that there's, hobbyists and craftsmen and artists, and not everybody is an artist. But at the same time, I said everything could be considered art. And it's totally confusing, and I totally get the question because we have these two different definitions of art. And I think that while everything could be described as art, I don't know that necessarily you should describe everything as art. And for sure, I think that there is good art and bad art. And I did not explain what good art is as opposed to bad art. And these statements that I'm gonna attempt to define good art, and it's probably more controversial than even saying that beauty is objective. I'll just own that people are gonna disagree with my definition of good art. But very loosely, I would say that good art has some combination of these 5 things. The first is that it's something original. The second is that it has great technique. The third is that it displays beauty in some way. The fourth is that it says something true. Now, if you remember in my last episode, I said that art didn't necessarily have to be beautiful. And it doesn't necessarily have to say something true either. It can say something that you think is true. And again, this is some combination. It doesn't have to both be beautiful and say something true. But if it could do both, or if it could do all 5 of these things, then I think it's great art. And the 5th thing I didn't mention yet was that there's some sort of intangible charisma about it, or about the artist, or about the performance. And charisma is super hard to define. And I wish I could get my arms around charisma because it is a force of nature. It is one of the most powerful things in human psychology and in human motivation. But again, those 5 things were, it's original, it has great technique, it displays beauty in some way, it says something true, and there's some charismatic element to it. Again, good art doesn't have to contain all 5 of these things, but it will have some combination of these 5 things. And great art will have all 5. An example of great art, in my mind, is the Pieta by Michelangelo. Look it up. I'll include a link to a photo. It is a gorgeous statue, and I think it displays all 5 of these characteristics of great art. Listener Ted also wrote in to ask, what do we lose by not recognizing beauty? And this is a great question. I'm so glad that Ted asked this question. I was hoping somebody would ask this question because I think this is a vital question to consider when we search for beauty and seek beauty. And if we get it wrong, if we call the wrong things beautiful, what happens to us? If we don't see beauty, or we mislabel things as beautiful when they are not, what happens to us? I'm going to suggest 3 things, and there's probably more. The first is that we miss out on something inspiring. Like, we need inspiration in our lives. It is good for you to have things in your life that make you go, whoa, wow, that's beautiful. You need that in your life. You will not live a fulfilling life if you're missing out on moments of beauty. That doesn't mean that your life needs to be consumed with the pursuit of beauty. It doesn't mean that somebody who doesn't have beauty in their life is living a less meaningful life than other people. But it aids in adding meaning to our lives. The second thing is our concept of truth is corrupted. If truth is beautiful and beauty is truth, and that's a bit of a tautology, but I think it's true. Truth is beautiful and beauty is true. They're intertwined. And if it's as bad to say that something is beautiful when it's not, as to say that something false is true. It's the same kind of impact. What sort of impact hits you if you say that 2 + 2 = 5? Well, it could be meaningless. Like, given the circumstance, it might not have any impact on you at all. But if you go through your life assuming that 2 + 2 = 5, it could have massive consequences on you. It could kill you. If you're building a bridge under the assumption that 2 + 2 = 5, something bad is going to happen. The same goes with beauty. It could be inconsequential in the moment, but it could lead to something rather destructive. You could be forming rituals around something grotesque that ends up hurting people or killing people or causing people to kill other people. The third thing is that our character is corrupted. If you continue to lie, it's going to hurt you. I hope you believe that. I hope you believe that it's detrimental to your own character to lie when you shouldn't, to say false things when you shouldn't. And if you are intentionally or unintentionally distorting beauty in your life, your character will be corrupted in the same way as it would be if you lie. Thanks for that great question. Issue number 3. Calliaux. Okay, I read this amazing book about World War I. It was called A World Undone, and it was great. And whenever I think about World War I, somebody will say, well, what caused World War I? And they'll say, well, the assassination of Franz Ferdinand. And you're like, okay, well, that guy died, but why did that cause this massive war that killed millions of people? And I read this great book about World War I, and I totally recommend it. It's totally written at a popular level. I found it really riveting, and, I know how the war ends, but still I was like, oh, what's going to happen next? And I was invested at certain points where I'm rooting for different sides because I just want the war to end. Like, I want this battle to work. I want this strategy to accomplish what somebody hoped it would accomplish, just so the human misery would stop. Well, there is this story out of World War I that I don't know why we don't know more about it. Like, there should be movies about this story involving the French premier, Joseph Calliaux. Joseph Calliaux could have single-handedly prevented World War I from happening. I'm not joking. One man really could have done it. He was the French premier, and he was a pacifist. He wasn't interested in going to war. France at the time was building their military in hopes of enacting revenge on Germany for taking part of their territory, Alsace-Lorraine. And he was actually slowing down their military production and their military buildup. And he did not want to go to war. But there are some things that got in the way of Joseph Calliaux preventing the war. Let me back up on him. He was a bachelor until his mid-40s, and he did not get married until he met his first wife, and I believe her name was Therese. I had a hard time tracking it down. The problem with Joseph and Therese was that Therese was already married to another man, and she began an affair with Joseph, and left her husband for Joseph. Well, they were married for several years, and Joseph decided to start cheating on Therese. And he began an affair with this woman named Henrietta. And Henrietta was also married to someone else at the time. And they both divorced their spouses and eventually got married as soon as they could. As soon as both, marriages were dissolved, they were able to marry one another. They were actually quite rich, the two of them combined. And Joseph becomes the French premier. And while he's in office, this newspaper that is not a fan of his publishes private letters between he and his first wife. And this actually causes scandal in France because it reveals there was nothing sexual about this correspondence, but it revealed some of his backhanded political dealings. And he and his wife discovered that this newspaper editor had letters between them, Joseph and Henrietta. And he was threatening to publish these letters between them, which would make the scandal all that much worse. And Henrietta vowed to stop this from happening, to save her husband's credibility and his reputation. So she is an aristocrat, okay? She goes down, she has her drive her to the newspaper office without an appointment. She goes in and says, "I'd like to meet with the editor." And he's away, he's at a meeting. They say, "I'm sorry, he's not here. He'll be gone until late in the day." She said, "That's fine. I'll sit and I will wait." So the newspaper editor finds out that the French premier, basically the first lady of France, is sitting in his office. And he's like, "Well, I don't want to meet with her. Like, I don't like her. And she knows I've got this dirt on her. What's the point in meeting with her?" But this is something that we don't really have today. She's a lady. She's an aristocrat. She gets certain privileges that don't exist for the rich and powerful today. Well, maybe they do, but we don't defer the way he felt he needed to this woman. So he says, "Okay, I'll go meet with her." So he goes into his office, and she has got a hand muff, a thing that women stick their hands into instead of gloves. And inside that muff is a revolver. And she pulls out this gun and kills him. She shoots him like 4 to 6 times. And the police come, and, an ambulance comes and takes him away. The police come to arrest her. But because she's a lady, she refuses to go with the police. She says, "No, I'll have my chauffeur drive me to the police station." And the police are like, "Fine, yes, that makes sense. Of course. Why would we take you away? You're an aristocrat." So she goes to the police station. She gets arrested. Mind you, her husband is the French premier. We have no scandals like this in American history. This is crazy. So she's arrested. They have a trial. In the trial, she admits that she shot the editor. And she says, "But I was only trying to scare him. I closed my eyes and pointed down, and he just happened to fall on the ground where I was shooting." So the jury takes all this information, and they come back and they say that she is not guilty. And the reason she's not guilty is because she's a woman. And of course, she's full of passion, and she couldn't help herself. Women, I can't believe that this actually worked as a defense, but they said that, women get emotional and they can't help themselves. And we all need to just recognize that sometimes their emotions might get so much of them that they'll deliberately sit in somebody's office for an hour and wait for them with a premeditated plan to kill them. And we need to let them go when this happens because they can't help it. They're so weak to their emotions.
Wrong, 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 wrong. Wrong, 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 wrong. You're wrong, you're wrong, You're wrong.
So she gets off scot-free from murdering this guy. But Joseph Calliaux, so Archduke Franz Ferdinand has been assassinated while this is taking place. And her husband's, his tenure in office is threatened by this scandal. So she does this to save his reputation, but ironically, she ends up costing him his office. He has to resign in shame and scandal. And when he resigns, he would have prevented the war. But he resigns and somebody else comes in and takes his place, and they are a war hawk. They're like, yes, let's go. Like, this is our chance to crush Germany. And they take the country into war. What I hope that we can all take away from this story is, once again, a reminder that character matters in leadership. This guy was a scoundrel. He was involved in scandals because of his own choices. And those scandals ended up ruining his leadership and ruining all of Europe, because a war took place where the one guy who could have prevented it had to step aside because of his own sexual indiscretions and the poor character of he and his wife. But I could be wrong. If you think I am, let me know, and let me know why. I had fun, and I hope you did too. Bye-bye.